the birth of a nation, the history of the adoption of the United States, Declaration of Independence. When we hear of the 4th of July, images of festive fireworks, parades, and family picnics in America immediately come to mind. Behind this celebratory facade lies a day that altered the course of world history, the day of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. It was not merely a dry political act, but a bold, almost reckless step taken by 13 disparate colonies, challenging the mighty British Empire. The story of this document is one of mounting anger, philosophical courage, and an insoluble contradiction embedded in the very foundation of the new state. It began not with lofty ideals, but with very earthly problems, money and power. Following the costly war with France, the British Crown, burdened by debt, resolved to replenish the treasury at the expense of its American possessions. A whole series of laws ensued: the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, which imposed taxes on the colonists. These laws were enacted in distant London, in a parliament where the Americans had not a single representative. The famous slogan, "No taxation without representation," became the heartfelt cry of an entire people who felt themselves to be second-class citizens. Tension mounted. The Boston Massacre, where British soldiers fired into a crowd, the desperate act of the Boston Tea Party, and, finally, the punitive, intolerable acts of 1774, which completely exhausted patience. In the spring of 1775, the first shots rang out at Lexington and Concord. Open war had begun. The Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia, convened in such a charged atmosphere, initially wavered. Many delegates still hoped for reconciliation with the mother country. But blood was already being shed, and the ideas of the Enlightenment concerning natural rights, the social contract, and the right of the people to overthrow tyranny were in the air, finding fertile ground. The turning point came in the summer of 1776. On June 7th, the fiery Virginian Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. To draft this assertion into a formal document, a committee of 5 was created, and the task of composing the initial text fell to the 33-year-old Thomas Jefferson, renowned for his eloquence and profound knowledge of philosophy. In his rented room on Market Street in Philadelphia, during the sweltering June days, Jefferson was crafting not merely a list of grievances, but a manifesto for a new era. He took as his foundation the ideas of John Locke and other thinkers, but clothed them in a unique, brilliant form. The heart of the Declaration became the opening lines of its second paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was a report louder than any cannon shot. Instead of justifications to the king, a new source of power was proclaimed: the people. This was followed by a long, detailed list of the usurpations and abuses of King George III, intended to prove to the world that the rupture was inevitable, and the guilt lay with the tyrant. However, the path of the text to final approval was not smooth. When Jefferson's draft was laid before the Congress, heated debates commenced. Delegates excised, altered, and argued. The most painful episode concerned slavery. Jefferson had included in his draft a fierce condemnation of the slave trade, calling it an execrable commerce, and laying the blame for it at the feet of the British Crown. but under pressure from Southern planters and Northern merchants whose profits were tied to it, this passage was mercilessly struck out. Thus, at the very moment of the birth of a document proclaiming freedom and equality, a Faustian bargain was struck with the most monstrous inequality, a contradiction that would later lead the country to a bloody civil war. On July 2, 1776, mustering its courage, Congress unanimously adopted Lee's resolution for independence. The second day of July, 1776, John Adams wrote to his wife that night, "will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America." But the date forever imprinted on the collective memory of the nation was July 4th, the day when, after 2 days of revisions, the final, canonical text of the Declaration was approved. It was immediately sent to print, and soon town criers across the land read to jubilant crowds the words that everyone now knew. "We, the representatives of the United States of America, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states." The historical significance of this step is difficult to overstate. The war was transformed from a local conflict into a revolution for the creation of an entirely new kind of state. The ideas of the Declaration flew across the ocean, becoming the intellectual gunpowder for the French Revolution and many other liberation movements. But its primary destiny lay in America itself. The Declaration did not become statutory law, but it became the nation's moral and ideological compass. The text, signed by slaveholders, decades later inspired abolitionists in their struggle. Its words, carved on monuments, were quoted by Martin Luther King, Jr. and civil rights activists. It became a promise the nation made to itself, a promise it would have to strive to fulfill again and again, through struggle, suffering, and a constant striving toward that self-evident truth, to finally make it truly so for all, without exception.